Excited to be here after a long time. I think the title for this talk is Out of the Start. And what myself and Rebecca were discussing, like we have a lot of I think startups networking in February. So one of the requests was why can't you talk about what do startups look for and how we can help others so that they can join startups. So how can you launch your startup career? Few things. I'm not going to talk about how do you want to start a startup. That's entirely different conversation. I'm not here to give you advice about how to be a founder of a startup. It's about how do you join early as a team member or as an employee. Second thing, I have around 25 to 30 minutes of slides, and then I'm going to open this floor for discussion. So please hold off all your questions till all the slides are done, and then I'll be here as long as you want. So that's there. So a beat. So I work at a startup called AdsNative. I'm one of the founders. It started out of as some wacko, I would say, final projects or research that we were doing, and that's how we got started. It has lots of backstory, so I won't go into that details. But what we do is we provide monetization software for the internet. At this moment, we are tackling advertising as an industry, and you can check us out on adsnative.com. You'll find lots of information, and this is my Twitter handle, so just shameless plug. You can follow me. Just what we do, just as a very brief overview so that you know what is AdsNative. This is one of our customers' homepage, and as you can see, generally advertising, if you go to any web page, any app, it's kind of flashy in your eyes. It sucks in every possible way. We all use ad blockers for the same. So what we thought, users don't mind advertising. Users just mind bad advertising. So how we can improve the user experience of advertising? So as you can see, that sponsored content, the ad content fits well within the user experience of the application itself. So we do that in real time on any website, any app. So that's what our software does. So that's our key value prop and secret sauce. We can change any ad that look and fit into the rest of the content so the users can interact with promoted content just the way they access the rest of the website or an app. It works great, users like them, and both advertisers and what we call publishers or app developers are happy. So that's what we do. We have 3 offices, San Francisco, New York, and we just opened one in Bangalore. We have raised almost $11 million in venture financing, which is, we are around 35 people. Last 3.5 years, that's what we have grown. So what is startup? There are a lot of different definitions of startup. A lot of people think startup is a small company. I don't think so. Startup is not a small company. Steve Blank, who is one of the professors at Haas, also founder, entrepreneur, writer, he calls startup is a temporary organization that is looking for a repeatable and scalable business model. No one wants to be a startup. Every company ceases to be a startup at some day or at some point, because that's what the expectation is like. As Paul Graham, himself an entrepreneur and investor with Y Combinator, he calls startup is a company designed to grow fast. You should grow really fast, maybe general, in Silicon Valley terms, what we call is around 6 to 8 years, you should be really big. What do I mean by big? Means your market cap should be around $1 billion. So from 0 to 8 years, around you should be reaching that $1 billion as a market cap. There are lots of companies which reach even faster, like WhatsApp is an example. I would say Uber is another great example. They grew even faster than that. So startup is not just a small company. Startup is not something that is just hey, we just found it, so we will call ourselves startup. Startup is a company that is designed to grow fast, and it is in search of repeatable and scalable business model. In general, most startups you will find, when startups are in startup phase, they are looking for, or they are generally confused about who their customers are, how they are going to make money, and what their product is going to be. So either of these 3 or all these 3 are the open questions for most startups. So now, if you want to join a startup, how are you going to pick one? That's what I'm going to cover in this particular talk. So I'm just going to put it this way, like particularly in Silicon Valley, we have what we call like venture investors, or like the institutional investors. They help to start, like they help startups by giving funding so that they can hire people. In the meantime, they can figure out what is their business model, revenue models, focus on growth rather than revenues. So most of the venture investors put checks, that's what we call, and in any fund for 6 to 8 years, like they raise, if the fund is what we call more than like $150 million, which is like a good amount, like significant, like you're a big VC firm, you put checks in 20 startups, and out of that only 2 succeed. So most startups are extremely risky. So you have to be very careful, like how do you make that decision, like where almost there is significant failure rate? How do you pick the right one? Whereas we as in humans, we don't have that much time. We can at the most work at during that 6 to 8 years at the most 2 companies. And outcome, we are not sure, like, okay, will that succeed? Will not. Like even if team, like startup might be working on like awesome idea, great product, great team, huge market, it's not always the case that it's going to succeed. So that creates a problem. Like how do you choose a startup where you want to work, where there is an outcome of success? So that's what I'm going to cover in this particular talk. Like there are certain ways you can optimize your success. There are certain ways you can look for certain signals or indicators where you can be successful, and how do you approach those startups and hopefully work there. So the 4 areas that I'm going to talk is finding interesting startups that are going to be extremely successful. What kind of roles most startups generally hire at different stages of the companies. What do you bring to the table? What should be your profile to get hired at any of these like successful startups or the ones that are going to be successful? And how do you connect with them successfully? So these are the 4 areas I'll be covering mostly. So first, how do you find? In Silicon Valley, it's kind of like a cliched thing that failure is a badge of honor. Yeah, you should not be afraid for failure, but that's kind of like misnomer. Like failure is definitely like, it doesn't mean that like you should be afraid of trying out new things. You most likely are going to fail, but that doesn't mean you are going to seek out failure. So in Mark Andreessen, who is one of the founders of Netscape, and then like venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, fairly successful one. Like he has pretty interesting quote that I personally really like, is like, my goal is not to fail fast, my goal is to succeed over the long run. And they are not the same thing. So I see a lot of people making that mistake. Oh, they just join any startup, like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's going to fail. Failure is a badge of honor. That doesn't matter. Like that doesn't mean you should seek out failure. What you want to do is you want to succeed in a long run. And that you should be optimizing for your career as a whole. It's not that you are seeking out failure. So there is something, how do you find with that, like how do you find interesting startups that are going to be succeeding? With public companies or with publicly listed companies, you have their all the financials out. You can check out like how they performed in last quarter, which product lines worked, which product lines are not working, how big is the employee strength, how much money do they have in the bank, all sorts of things you can understand. So, and there are like hundreds and thousands of analysts like analyzing all the public companies like performance quarter over quarter, year over year. So you have a lot of information, but that is not always the case with startups. With startups, no information is public because they are private by default. And even in press, even in media that you see, it's kind of like press release. Like so, you would see like tip of the iceberg. Like we generally tend to just like release the positive things about us. Like rarely we want to open our like kitchen sink. So no one wants to do that. Like most startups, they're always talking about all the great things. This is the greatest thing in the world, and we don't want to open our kitchen sink, like because it's private company, and you don't want people to be scrutinizing your books or the way you are doing. So how do you find an interesting startup to work for, which is going to be successful? So there is something known as S-curve innovation. You will understand, like as in, in technology, and I'm talking about like mostly like the technology, as in like electronics, computers. I'm not that expert at life sciences or biotech type of areas, so please excuse me on those areas. So my experience is mostly about like computers and hardwares. So what we call like S-curve innovation, like there is fundamental change or some disruptive change that causes to create new market or new market segment. And every 10 to 15 years, there is kind of like new S-curve wave. And during every S-curve, there is new company that is created. So if you see like just for like computing as a time, like for computing as a market, during 60s and 70s due to semiconductor, the growth in semiconductor, you saw like mostly like mainframes. Which company was the king of mainframes? It was IBM. Like IBM became like the dominant force. Then all of a sudden, like you had late 70s companies like Apple and Microsoft that were created because Moore's law, prices of the hardware were dropping. There was need for software. You could do a lot of different things. And so in 80s, we moved from just giant mainframes to personal computers, and the companies that kind of like that capitalized on this particular trend were Apple, Microsoft, to name a few, like bunch of others were there. Then mid-90s, we had internet. Like the invention, like internet became internet was already there, but World Wide Web made it kind of like household activity, as in our household thing. So we moved into the new paradigm of computing, which is like internet or cloud computing, and the companies that kind of like capitalized on that particular trend were Google, Amazon, eBay, bunch of their, like they all like several $1 billion in like their market caps and extremely successful. Then mid 2000s, like the mobile growth started. Like we saw like particularly this device, as in like iPhones and the smartphones, they are, whoops, they are more powerful, extremely powerful, as in PC on your pocket. And so with that, we saw companies like WhatsApp, even Facebook is now purely a mobile company. Instagram, WhatsApp, bunch of other companies that started like that capitalized on that particular trend and became extremely successful. And now we are seeing this like new, which is like Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robots. Like that's where we are moving, like self-driving cars, then like all these robots and like IoT, fitness trackers, all these, like because like there is ubiquitous connectivity. So if you see in for every S curve, there was like some underlying factor. Like for mainframes, it was semiconductor, Moore's law for like PCs as a growth. For internet and cloud computing, it was creation of like World Wide Web. For mobile, like smartphones were released, and for AI, I think we are moving towards like extremely powerful computers in really small devices. So you can do lots of computation that is needed for like artificial intelligence, robots, or IoT type of devices. So if you see for every type of like every wave, there were like few companies that kind of completely capitalized. This goes for like this for computing as an entire spectrum, and there are like small markets within that, like advertising. Then you can call it social networks. Every market has its own like S-curves that are going on. I think in hardwares you can have similar type of S-curves. There are different companies. Productivity software, I'm sure there are like different, like every 10 to 15 years, there is like fundamental change that brings out new companies. So your job is to find what is that next S-curve wave that is going to be. Now we are in like mid to like 2010s. You need to find out like what is going to be that. How do you find about that? Where do you find them? The easiest thing, Berkeley, Stanford, MIT, a lot of this research that you see, what is going on is going to be part of that. I think some of the future. So just to give you an example, I think, how many of you heard Apache Spark? So Apache Spark, like I remember when I was a student here, Spark was still few grad students who were working at Berkeley at that time, and it's kind of like next wave in like big data or like large scale data processing. So already there are a bunch of companies that are getting started, and all the companies are using. So, just take a look at all the School of Engineering, like different research areas that are going on, and where exactly it is, what is going to be. Same goes like virtualization. I think VMware companies that was started by some of the Berkeley alums. It was part of their research at computer science. So that's one way you can look at. Another way you can find it out is check out Google Trends. Google Trends is an awesome tool. It's a great tool for market research. You can just, it's based on like what do people search. So it just gives you like graphical visualization of what people are looking for, what people are searching for. So it will show you like if something is picking up, then you will see a lot of like activity on Google Trends. So that is another way you can find it out. Another, just a caveat is if you see mainstream press covering any of these like buzzwords or any of these trends, it's already too late. It's like, generally they are like laggers, like they reach when there is like, it's not at the start. Like, and another heuristic that you should try, most new technologies look like toys at the start. A lot of people laugh at them. A lot of people like, oh, this is stupid. Who will use that? And that becomes kind of like the most important thing. That's what happened with PCs. Like there was Homebrew Computer Club, and mostly hobbyists used to gather. With internet, it was only academics. That was people were using initially, and no one thought like it's not going to be like mainstream. For everything, there is like mostly, it started as a toy. Everyone laughs at that, and all of a sudden like it picks up all the momentum, and it becomes the next trend or the next wave of growth. So that is a great heuristic just to find it out. Like if a lot of people are just talking about it and people deriding them as the toys, it's a good signal that it's not a toy. Something like it's going to change. Second is what they call is moonshot thinking. I'm not sure if you guys have heard about moonshots. So it's like during 60s, President Kennedy declared that like, hey, we want to land on the moon, and I give you that 10-year window. And wow, within 10 years, nobody knew about that. Like, okay, how do we even like throw a man out of Earth's orbit into the moon? So the startups that go for really impossible things are generally tend to be more successful. This is also like the way Google thinks. In fact, it's part of their culture. Like if you guys have worked at Google, some of you, like it's kind of like Larry Page, the way he always says that. Like we are looking for moonshots. They go for like absolute impossible goals. It could be like when they started like just organizing world's information. That was their motto initially, or the vision. Self-driving cars, like impossible. Like if you think in 2007, like who would do that? Like they're robots, like who can drive themselves. So the way moonshot thinking works is if you are going for impossible dream, or it's impossible challenge, or as a goal, even the 65% of impossible is much better than 100% of possible. So even if you may end up in failure, you tend to learn a lot. Say, if you're working on self-driving car, like you started your startup like 3 years ago or 5 years ago on self-driving cars, you need to learn about a bunch of things. You need to be really good at computer vision, because the way self-driving cars works is like camera is always capturing the area around you. So you need to be really good at computer vision. You need to be really good at navigation. You need to be really good at maps. So even if you may not get into that, like if you work at any startup that is doing self-driving car, you might be really expert at any of these areas. Then even if that startup fails, you can start your own company in these several areas. So that's what moonshot thinking is, like where you go, any company that goes for impossible dream, generally there is that's another good signal. Like, and how do you know about that? Just like talk with founders, talk with what they think about that, like what's their goals. Like, just to give you an example, some of the most successful companies, like Microsoft's goal initially, right from the start, was like a desktop in every home, on every desk in, so that was their goal. Like at every home, every desk should have a PC that is using Microsoft software. It was back in '76, like there were like how many people were even using computers at that time, but that was their goal. So pretty impossible challenge, but they achieved it till '90s. Google's goal was organizing world's information. Like that's how they got started. And now they're almost there. Like Facebook was like connecting entire world, and they have billions of users using that. So the companies or the founders who are going for that impossible challenge, like daring to go beyond like what is possible, that is another good signal, like to find or consider that like these are great startups to work for, I would say. Then there are a bunch of things, factors. The most important thing, even if you have great startup that is going for, that is capitalizing on the trend, the next wave, it's going for the moonshots or like the impossible challenge, there are a few other things that you should be looking for. The most important thing, growth. Like growth kills everything. Like you might have excellent team, great market, going for impossible challenge, but if you are not growing, you are dead. Like startups don't get killed. Startups kill themselves. Like startups are suicidal. Like if they don't grow, they don't have funding, they don't have revenue, and eventually they have to shut their doors. So always look for growth. Like how do you know about that? Like whether that startup is growing? When you are interviewing with any startup, just talk with their founders and ask them, hey, how much did you grow last quarter, last year? And ask them to be as objective as possible. Like they will say, oh, we added this many users or whatever that. There is always this, what we call vanity metrics, the metrics that don't matter. Like the metrics that matter is like, if it's a consumer startup, then like, are you able to get the land grab, means as many users as possible? If it's enterprise or B2B startup, how much is the revenue or how many customers do you have? So try to prove founders or the team on these factors, like what is your growth, and don't forget about that. Like always ask this question at the start. Like whenever they are interviewing you, you are also interviewing with them. So that's always the case. You need to also look at like who are the founders and the team. Generally, like really smart founders, really smart team, they can overcome a lot of challenges. By nature, as a startups, they are doing something that has not been done before. So it tends to be extremely challenging and extremely stressful. So if you have generally smart team of founders, it's good. How do you know about that? If you talk with them, it's just like, if it's educational for you, like whatever they are talking about, that's a good signal. Like that's generally I consider, like if I meet someone really smart and if I'm learning something new from that person again and again, that means it's great. Like that person is really smart, and that is at least my test. You can use their product. For consumer products like apps, website, like any of the consumer or social, you can try yourself. Like great products speak for themselves. If team is really awesome, the product has to be great. Like it will never be bad. Like it's kind of like it's kind of heuristic test for like the quality of the team. The quality of product is kind of the heuristic for quality of the team. So if it's a enterprise, like generally enterprise startups don't tend to have like you need to sign up for them. Just whenever you are talking with them, ask them to give you a demo of their product. Or just like you can ask them for some demo login and you can try it themselves, so that like you can see like how it works, right? Or experience yourself. That's the most important thing. And if team is awesome, it's growing, product is really kick-ass, then likelihood that they will have great investors, like really top investors they are able to attract. By the way, not every startup takes funding. There are what we call bootstrap startups. So it's not always the case that like they might have investors. So don't stress on that point a lot. But around 70 to 80% startups tend to have some investors or venture backers. That's what we call. So these are kind of like areas that you should be asking. So just to sum up, how to find interesting ones where there is high probability of success. You need to find startups that are capitalizing on certain trend or like certain next S wave of growth. That's first. And then the startups that are going for impossible challenge, or like the goals that are like really lofty goals. And based on your conversations with their team, like how fast they are growing, how smart is their team, how great is their product, and if they have really A type of investors. I think that pretty much, if they have a lot of these things in place, that means there is something special is going to happen. So these are like some of the factors I would highly recommend. Second is roles. What kind of different roles are there at startups? There are two main roles, two major areas that startups are always hiring. First is builders, and the second is sellers. Builders are engineers and designers, and the second is sellers. So sales and marketing. So if you fit into these roles, there are ample jobs. There are always ample jobs. So why? Because there are two areas that startup always need help. They are always building their product, and they always need customers. So they need to market it or sell it to the customers. So it's right from day one. These roles are always needed. Initially, when startup is just few people, maybe just founders, generally founders play this role. Like maybe one founder might be engineer, one might be designer, one might play another, like one might be working in like sales or marketing. So it's initially founders who play these roles, and then like as they start growing, where the founders find or the founders don't have the skills, they slowly keep adding that. That's how it happens. So it's kind of like inverted pyramid. Like the most roles, most areas where startups are looking for are engineers and designers. Then sales, growth marketing. Like if it's a B2B startup or enterprise startup, that means they are directly going knocking on the doors of the customers for sales. So they have a lot of salespeople or sales representatives. If it's a consumer startup, that means they are looking for growth. So what they have is like user acquisition type of marketers, like who are really good with what we call, like if it's internet-based startups, what we call like search engine optimization, search engine marketing, monetization, SEO, SEM, the terms you might have heard. General brand marketing, also like it depends on that what type of startup is that. So I'll just put it this: if generally it's less than 15 people, it's mostly engineers and designers, and maybe one or two sales or marketing. It's rarely more than that because founders are playing that role of sales and marketing. 15 to 50 people, you'll have more engineers, more designers, more sales, because founders are not doing sales themselves. They are busy with other roles. Someone dedicated for marketing, someone dedicated for sales. Then once you have more than 50 to 100 people, around less than 150, that's where the product manager type of roles come into the picture. Till that time, product managers' roles are generally filled by founders themselves. They are the product managers because they know the market, they know customers, they know what is working, what our sales team needs. So they are generally one of the founders is the product manager. And then once you are like more than 200, 300 people, all the traditional roles start into that, like HR, finance, accounting, and the last ones are analysts and all sorts of things. That once you're much bigger, that's where like all these analysts are like those roles, like et cetera, like whatever, like the creative titles nowadays people use. But as I said, like builders and sellers, that's how I think most startups hire on those two roles. So whenever you are looking for interesting startup to join, think yourself, your profile in any of these two buckets, and try to make your resume or your profile that fit into these two buckets. Like it could be that like you are really good at marketing, then see if that startup is like say consumer startup, then you might have to learn a lot about like how user acquisition or like how to get more and more users, like type of like techniques on marketing. Try to add that to your arsenal. If you are really good at design, so try to see that like what is existing team of that particular startup, like what type of designers do they work. And also like generally most startups tend to have, as I said, like generally at startups, they don't have enough cash, they don't have enough customers, and they don't have enough people. Besides that, they are great. So most people play multiple roles, like particularly companies that are less than 50 people, so you are wearing multiple hats. So I see a lot of my, like I've heard at least few of my friends like asking like, oh, like I'm applying for this particular startup, I want to join, and I only do user research, like as a designer, like I only do user research, or as a marketing, I only do specific part of the marketing. So I generally tell like that's not going to cut. Like you need to be like really good at 2 or 3 things. Like if you're a designer, you need to be really good at like visual design, interaction design, user research, at least 2 to 3 things you should be really good at. That's how most startups look for, because at least less than 50 people, we are looking for generalists rather than like real specialists. Like as startup grows, as company grows, you tend to go into like specialization type of roles, as this like inverted pyramid says. So that these are all roles that most startups look for, at least my experience, like talking with other founders, that's what they look for. Lastly, I've seen a lot of my friends really get hung up on the titles. So yes, titles are important, or getting particular role. So this is something I really love what Sheryl Sandberg said. Before Facebook, Sheryl was one of their like early employee at Google also. So, and she was considering working at Google. So, and she was not happy with the role and the title, something like that. So Eric Schmidt told her in these lines, like, if you are offered a seat on a rocket ship, get on it. Don't ask what seat. So, because if startup is growing, it's like a rocket ship. You can create your own role after a short time if you do a really great job. In my startup, I would definitely say that. Like, yeah, some people join for a completely different role. And now, since we are growing, all right, we need people. Rather than hiding from outside, okay, can you do that? That's how the conversation is like. And the other person said, yes, done. You're in charge of that entire area now. So it's that simple. Like, so that's how it works. Because people who are inside initially, like they know the market, they know the team. It's very easy to promote inside. So don't get hung up on, I want to do only this thing, I want to do only that thing, or I want only that title. It's a rocket ship, just get a seat on that, and then you can figure out which seat is afterwards. Then next part is profile. What do you bring to the table? So generally, I would highly recommend to research market and competitors. Like, I've seen a lot of my friends just like randomly applying to startups and with no thoughts, nothing. And I think like, just as I said, you need to find any startup that is going to be like highly successful. So find whatever the next growth wave is going to be. Research into that market. With internet, there is tons of information out there. You can read, research, get as much information as possible. So just research market, competitors. Check out their website. The most importantly, like most of the startups put all their things on their website because to attract their customers, and it's not just to attract those customers, it's attracting the talent also. So it's both ways. The reason we put out a lot of information on our websites, it's both customers as well as talent. Whenever you are creating your profile or your resume, use objective measure. Like whatever, like I did, say like I increased the revenue in your previous job from 30% or 50% on the product that I was working on. That is an objective measure. Don't use buzzwords. Yesterday I got a resume, someone said, I'm a technology visionary. That was the first sentence. I was like, okay, next, like right away. Like if someone claims technology visionary, you are not a technology visionary. So you don't have to write that out. So don't use any buzzword like innovation expert. You have no idea the amount of people use that on their LinkedIn profiles and on their resumes. Like you can do it as a joke on your LinkedIn, but if you are applying for any job, don't do that. So like, lastly, experience is extremely overrated. Most startups are looking for right skills rather than experience. At least in my personal experience, even for my company, like whenever we hire, experience is good to have, but it's not a must-have. Like as long as you are really smart, you're really great, committed, it doesn't matter. Like you are fresh out of the college, you don't have any experience. So experience is really overrated. So don't worry about that if you don't have the relevant experience. As long as you are good at problem solving, as long as you are good at overall, like the way you approach like the market or any of the problems that you get, you are good. And overall, I think that's the difference that sets up between like much more, I would say, robust or like mature companies or organization where they must have 5 years of experience or 10 years of experience, whereas at startups it's like, okay, just show up type of thing. As long as you are smart, you're in type of thing. So that's the difference. So whenever you are creating on your profile, your resume, take into consideration all these things. Don't use buzzwords, as I said, use objective measure. And if you are going after a certain market, like if you really want to apply jobs in, say, self-driving cars, great market, like lots of startups, lots of people working in that particular area. Another thing is like you can be a little bit, you can take some initiatives, like just start your blog and writing about like what are the challenges of self-driving cars, and just like keep updating every week, whatever that may be. That itself sets you apart. Like you're really caring about like certain market. If you really care about productivity software, so what are the areas, what are the challenges, what are the new trends? Just like mention that, like be expert at, like start using those productivity softwares, mention that in your resumes or your LinkedIn, so that like it clearly sets you apart. Next part is like, how do you connect with now, you have found a great startup or you have found number of startups that are going to be like, in your opinion, they might succeed. Then you know what roles are you looking at. You have kind of like honed your profile as per those roles, and then like you have done your market research, you have done your homework, and you have modified your profile as per what you have done so far. How do you connect with those interesting startups? How many of you heard AngelList, by the way? Like very few. Yeah, a lot of people have heard. So AngelList, it's great. It's kind of most startups, at least in Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, or in North America, they list themselves out on AngelList. The reason being, AngelList kind of marketplace of investors, employees, founders. So it's kind of like social network of all these people, and almost everyone I know has listed their startup on AngelList. And one of the things with AngelList is like they have something known as AngelList Talent. So we all list out jobs, the openings that we have on AngelList, because like, at least most of the small startups, like very few people know about that. So how do people find about them is like, people will look into, say like, you're looking for productivity software, you go to their job search, just put a filter for productivity software, it will list out all the startups. So we list out all the jobs there because like we know people are visiting AngelList and checking out the jobs. So almost every startup that I know, all my friends' startups or like the founders that I know, they list themselves out on AngelList and they put out every single job. So you can apply using AngelList, very easy. All you need is your LinkedIn. So as far as my understanding goes, and you can also attach your resume, cover letters, whatever the job requirements are for every job that you are applying. One thing I would highly recommend on AngelList, if you are applying for jobs, don't apply in like blindly to 100, 200 startups, because when I get any application, AngelList also tells me like how many jobs this person applied at. So don't do that in like 100, 200, 300. Like I've seen like sometimes people do like 700. I'm like, okay, this is like the person is not on that. So few tips on connecting with founders. Founders at startups, whatever the domain name, almost every startup has that. Very few people know about that. A lot of people are going to hate me because I'm just revealing that secret out. This is for our internal communication that we use. Like any employee can bring any issue to the founders at startups. So you can email directly there, like a founders at, and it will be definitely reach directly to the founders' inboxes. The only caveat with that is like, if it's like growing startup, we tend to get like thousands, hundreds of emails every day. So there is likelihood that like it may or may not. But I'll tell you an interesting story. Foursquare, Foursquare, I think in 2009, it was really, really doing well. They were doing great. They kind of plateaued a little bit last couple of years. Once again, now they're picking it up. So in 2009, there were just founders at Foursquare. And someone, as their first member of their business development team, reached out to them. He found out about their email IDs. His name is Tristan Walker. He's now a founder of another startup now. So he reached out to them. He didn't hear back. So he emailed them 8 times, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 times. And then finally 9th time he heard back, okay, dude, you are sending me too many emails. What was the deal? Next day he flew to New York, met with the founders, and he joined as the first BD. Like, done. Like, it was that simple. Like, you can check out on his blog. Like, he has mentioned about his story of applying. So, perseverance matters. I've seen that myself. Like, once I got from someone almost 4 or 5 emails, and then like, okay, I should take a look at that. Like, this person is really passionate, and let me look at that. So it's okay. I would say, like, if you're spamming them, like, they will just like put it as a rule, like send it to the spam. So don't worry about spamming. And add something new rather than sending the same template of the email, like something new, like, hey, I did this, I did that. So that always helpful. Connect on social media. I've seen that, few people doing that on Twitter or the Facebook, commenting on any interesting press release, blog post, videos, just like reaching out. Like, it's always fun to know like what people are taking a look at your startup. So, of course, job fairs, networking events, particularly networking events. I would say don't go for these random networking events that we have. They are like startup meetups type of, like, someone might do like one of the publications or blog. They might do like, oh, this is startup night type of thing. But rather than the alumni, where like the alumni networks where there is like predefined type of like Berkeley is having on February, like we have a startup night. So since it's Berkeley, we know that all Cal's founders are going to be there. So it's already like the quality is going to be much higher for that particular networking event. So choose your networking events carefully, where you think the quality is going to be good rather than just like random people just showing up. So, and go to those networking events. And generally, founders or whatever the team members, early team members are generally present there. Like some of my team members are going to be at startup night, so I'm not sure I'll be there. But if you just interact with them, they can always talk about different job opportunities. You can just talk with them. You can even ask them, like, can I check out your office? And if we are always welcome, or drop by anytime. And you can always check out and even meet rest of the team or a few other people. So you can always do these things and create that rapport with the team. So it's very easy to do that. And the hackathons, at least in Bay Area, most startups conduct hackathons. It's the reason for hackathon is simple. Like, it's like from the startup's perspective, they just want to know, like, whenever there is some hackathon going on, it's just like they want to meet more people interested in similar area, like, or if you are opening up your developer platform, you want other people just to try it out. So there are like few reasons why mostly startups have hackathons. So show up to those hackathons. There is always free food, free drinks. So it's like whole night, and mostly at hackathons, they are sponsored by startups. You will find a lot of employees of that startup. So you can create that personal rapport or like meet with them out there. So with that, these are like some tips on connecting with founders. So with that, I'll just open that for discussion. Questions, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions on this, or no questions on the matter. Sure. Yeah, so you need to use mic for that.
Okay, you didn't mention anything about compensation. I think that's one of the reasons people would be attracted to a startup.
Yes, so compensation, because it comes in lots of shapes and sizes, that is always like, it's very hard to generalize on that. That's why I just avoided compensation, but I'll cover on that point. So just in compensation, there are multiple ways startup compensation works. First is like you'll get equity component, then you have like the hard cash, whatever you can call the liquid cash that you have. Uh, some startups might, generally the way it works is like you will have some component for equity and some as like liquid cash as a part of your compensation. In Bay Area, particularly in Bay Area, I'll talk about, we are in a bubbly times, frothy times. There are absolutely no way that people get underpaid if working for a startup. I don't know any of the founders that I know. They are always like, we are always talking about, okay, it's a market rate. Like everyone's providing market rate salaries on top of like how much equity that you get. So here's the thing. My advice is whatever you think is a market rate salary that you deserve, go for that. Don't compare or don't settle on those points or compromise on those points. Equity, treat it as kind of like icing on the cake, whatever you get. The reason is a lot of startups fail, and if it fails, even if you have significant equity, it's zero. It doesn't matter. But you are going to pay your bills using whatever the salary that you are getting. So don't compromise on that. And most startups that I know in Bay Area, I can't say that about rest of the world or rest of the US. In Bay Area, most startups nowadays pay market rate salary for the same reason. Because you're already taking risk joining that startup. So I think nowadays, like most startups pay at least market rate salary. That's far as I know.
Adding to that point, can you speak a little bit about how to evaluate the financial stability of a startup, especially when you don't have any public financial records available?
Absolutely. Few things. There are two ways, as I said. Either startup is bootstrap, means they haven't raised any money from any investors, and most likely they are generating revenues and they're profitable because they can't keep going if they don't have any money. Or they have raised money from investors. So the way it works, for mostly startups raise their funding, that the good rule of thumb for us is we raise money for 12 to 18 months. So if you have raised money like 12 months ago or 18 months ago, you should be asking them, are you guys profitable? Likelihood they might be profitable already. So that means it's good. Like they are already generating enough cash from customers. If they are not, when you are talking with the startup, the question you should be asking is how much runway do you have? Runway is like how much money do you have in the bank and what is your burn? If people don't tell about those things, it's not a good signal. Most, at least the people I know, if I get that question from any of the employees or any of the prospective people who are looking for that, like what is your burn, what is your runway, I'm more than happy to talk about that. So you can just calculate burn is per month, like we are burning, like say, like just to give an example, a startup X might be burning $100,000 per month, and they have raised money, say like last year, they have raised like $6 million. Now, how much they are burning? That means $1.2 million is their burn. And you can do just extrapolation, maybe another 600K as they are, keep growing. So their annual would be like $1.8 million. And if the runway is less than that, you should be asking, okay, so what's the plan? Like, are you going to be profitable by that time or not? And if people are not going to talk about like when they are going to be profitable, that's another bad signal. So people should talk about like what's their health of the startup. You should be asking them, and just ask these questions like when the startup is going to be like, what is your plan of action? Are you going to raise more money? Are you going to raise more? What is your runway? What is your overall burn? And just take a call based on that. Like I would highly, and I think most companies should be open about these things. Yeah.
Hi. First, thank you for your presentation. I really liked it. You were talking about the financial situation, and I was wondering, what is your personal opinion about this bubbly phase that you were mentioning. I mean, all the salaries are going up and up and up. It's like almost ridiculous how much you can get paid if you have the right skills in engineering. Are you like scared that it's going to grow and grow and it's going to be so hard to be profitable that it's going to like crash at some point? Is it like the whole area?
No, I don't think so, because it's a basic economics, and I think most founders are savvy enough on those, like what should be the burn, how much money they have, how much they can raise from the market when they are going to be profitable. Another thing is, like, particularly with software startups, we have something margins, the profitability margins. Most software startups have more than 30% in margin, which is huge. Like, if it's a hardware startup, it's less than 10%. It's very hard, unless you're Apple, which is like 30% always they get for every product. But so with software startups, margins are huge. So as long as founders are aware, like, where when they are going to be profitable, how much money they can raise, how much they can pay, I don't think so it's ever going to affect like the salaries are.
So you're not afraid that there's like that you're running into over-evaluation?
Overvaluation? So that is a value. Oh, that is an entirely different thing. Like, the value startups getting valued by private investors on their potential, like how much this startup will generate and what is their exact actual numbers are.
Sorry, maybe I didn't put my question right. I was a question like I want to know about like the VC needs to invest money and he needs to like get money back at some point.
Yeah.
So when there's over-evaluation, then the later rounds, like I might join a startup that is very doing good now, but maybe because they evaluated too high, there's no VCs that are interested at later stages. Is there any chance on like how to find out about that?
Yes, it's very hard to find out, number one, about that. So the question is on valuation. Whenever any company raises money, there is certain valuation. How do you determine valuation in public companies? Whatever your assets are, whatever the cash that you have in bank, and how much you are going to get in bank, it's kind of like based on that, and you are valued at certain number. Like, Google is maybe valued at $500 billion because they have assets of certain amount, and they are generating certain revenues, and they have certain cash in the bank. So based on that valuation is determined. For private companies, that number is not public. So whenever you are going for the next round of funding, a lot of times investors give you money based on your future valuation, because if you go public, if your valuation is like several $100 billion, so like they put random arbitrary number, like, okay, this is how, and this number is like generally startup founders, if you're really growing fast, then founders can demand that, okay, we want 100 million as a valuation or 1 billion as a valuation, and if you are really growing fast, because very few companies succeed, there are more than enough people who will be willing to put in checks, because that always works. So if you are overvalued, what happens if you are not able to, the question is like, if you are overvalued and if you are not able to justify your valuation, what will happen? And like, so we are in this time where like a lot of startups are overvalued for sure. So that's why bubbly or frothy times, that's there. What happens if you're not able to justify your valuation? At some point, you have to get real. You have to get real with revenues. You have to get real with the numbers. And if they don't match, or they don't, like, there is huge gap, there are only two things happen. Either you go out of business, or like you get sold for way less. So one example is Guild Group. I'm not sure many of you might have heard of that as a company. Guild Group was Guild Group, GILTE, and they were valued at $1 billion or something like that. And recently they got sold for $250 million. So like, it's changed. They have raised total $250 million. And the way it works also, investors, when they invest money, they have the first preference. So when anyone gets exit, investor gets the first check, like, because they have taken the risk. So the last ones are the founders and employees. Like, they will get any financial rewards out of any startup. So that's how it works. So it's concern as an entire ecosystem. A lot of companies are overvalued, but we don't know about future, how it's going to be. It's very hard to comment. Even the most savviest investors don't know what is going to happen with that. So to be honest, yeah.
You mentioned blog posts and spamming people's inboxes as things that might make us like really attractive candidates. Is there anything that you would think of that maybe we wouldn't know about that we could take advantage of in our short time at Berkeley that makes us more attractive candidates?
I think, as I said, mostly the alumni networking, they are great as an events because I've seen a lot of alumni coming to these events. It's always fun to catch up with people. So alumni networking events. So you're always welcome for that. Even the existing students are invited to a lot of these events. So do take advantage of that. And even after you graduate, there are in Bay Area. If you're in Bay Area, there are tons of those events. Honestly, like since Berkeley is in Bay Area, right here. Another thing is, if you want to connect with any startup, see any Berkeley alums working at that startup. You can easily find that on LinkedIn, like who work at Berkeley. I think in search itself, you can find that out. So, and try to message them. On LinkedIn itself, you can message. You need to go, might be LinkedIn Premier. It's like premium version, like few tens of dollars or something like that. You have to pay for that. If you're in job search, do get that and connect with the alumni first. Most likely alumni will be more than happy to help you out. So use the alumni network to the fullest. Absolutely. So I would definitely suggest that. Hmm? Premium version of LinkedIn. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I okay. Um, I'm a student that's graduating from the master's program here. I don't have much previous work experience. I just want to ask from like a personal development perspective. Do you think it's a good place to work at a startup as your first job out of college? I'm assuming that the startups will come in different shapes and shades. If there are certain startups that you think are good versus others are bad, like what are some criteria you should look for? Some things that come to mind are like, are you working with people that are more experienced so you can have mentorship? Or like be put on interesting projects that would have like a longer trajectory than just being killed in a few months?
I would say, so your question, just rephrasing that question, I think, is it advisable to work as a first job at startup? There is not always the chance that, or there is not always the case that you might get the mentorship that you might get at any mature company, right? I would highly recommend startup because like few years of startups, you'll be working in so many different areas. You'll be working on some of the really hardest challenges because a lot of things have not been done in the past. So you'll get much more out of that than like if you work at any of the big corps, like I've worked previously before, like you'll be working on just small things of like entire machine, and likelihood that you'll be also in like a lot of people I've seen, like they are purely in the maintenance type of like areas because like you have a machine that is working, that is churning a lot of money. You have to just, some people need to maintain that, and it's not a lot of learning you'll be getting out of your career. And the worst thing that can happen is like maybe a couple of years you learn about all these things, you go for big corps like any of the bigger companies like with that knowledge. So it should not be a problem. I think you'll get much more challenges. Mentorship also you'll get. There is always not the case because everyone is so busy. So, but you'll get much more challenging work that you otherwise you may not have. Like it's very rare to get that at like unless you work on like really kick-ass projects at the bigger corporation. So I would highly recommend startup. Yeah.
Are there like certain types of startups that are better suited for newbies in terms of the stage or the size or whatever? Like, are there some signs for that?
It's entirely up to your risk profile. Honestly, that's the biggest thing. If you don't want to take a lot of risk also, like maybe go for companies that are more than 50 people. They have raised certain amount of money, and like, yeah, they are a little bit more mature than just like 3 people like eating burritos in their like office every day type of thing. So just go for like a little bit more mature in that, and It's entirely like depends. Like if you just join 3 or 4 people, you'll be even exposed to a lot of different things. But again, it's extremely risky endeavor. If you go for 50 to 100 people, there's likelihood that like something might be different. So it's entirely what you're looking for, what's your risk profile, and what do you want to get out of that job. And based on that, you should go. Like if you're looking for mentorship, then definitely go for more than like 50, 60 people type of strength. Like because things are much more streamlined. There are more processes in our like place. 3, 4 people, it's just like, it's a very informal. It's extremely informal. You're just like talking, hey, you should do that, you should do that, I'll do this, done. Like that's your meeting every day. So yeah, 50, 60 people, then you have like proper calendars and all, meeting rooms, you start booking that. So yeah.
Hi. How would you, do you have any hints on, or what would you do if you would like to find co-founders?
Co-founders, that's an entirely different thing. I would say like I would stay away from that as a topic because starting a startup itself in a different endeavor. It requires completely different mindset.
So I was just wondering if there's like any events or places where there's people interested, but in like founding, but that are not yet founded.
Classes you meet, like the best co-founders are someone you know them pretty well. Like my co-founder was my classmate, and I know him for the last 7, 8 years. So at least for co-founders, you'll be spending most of your time with your co-founder first 3, 4 years. So you need to get it really right. And it's like a real estate. Like for hotel, what is a real estate or the location? It's like for any startup as a co-founder. That's the analogy. Like you cannot change your location once you pick that. So you need to be very careful. So ideally, people with whom you have worked in the past, the best place that you can get that, either you work at some company and you met some people with whom you work on certain projects or certain areas, or in the class, like you work on some research projects, or you work with them for a couple of years as a student, undergrad, grad student, doesn't matter. So you have that comfort, and that's very easy. So there are no other networking events to find co-founders, to be honest. At least I'm biased towards that, like people with whom you have already worked, and only get them on board. Don't do that just randomly people you have met. Like it's you'll be spending way too much time with your co-founder, more than with your girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse, whatever that is, for first 3, 4 years. Trust me. That is impossible to get that. Anyone else? Yeah.
I actually had 2 questions.
Yeah.
So the first one was, how does this advice apply to international students? And the second one was actually about something you said in your presentation before. You said that don't seek out failure, but you also said something about moonshot thinking, which is usually ambitious and kind of prone to failure as well.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile both of those?
Great question. Second one. First one for international students. So my understanding is you have optional practical training for at least 12 months. So it's a great time to find out good startup that you work for. Openly ask them, do you sponsor visas? If they say yes, yes. If they say no, it's not a good thing then for you. It's simple as that. Most startups can afford visa as long as they have money in the bank. So it should not be a problem, to be honest. So just ask that openly in your first conversation, first interview, whatever that it is. Listen, whenever my OPT ends, I'm looking for a visa. Are you going to do that? Can you support me in doing that? So I think people will be honest, to be honest, on that. Second is like, don't seek out failure, but like, how does that resonate with the moonshot thinking? So here's the thing. What is the definition of failure itself is with moonshot thinking, it's kind of like upside down. Like if you are going for a really impossible goal, like as a startup is also going for that impossible goal, like whatever you learn in doing that, even like you are not able to get 100% of that goal, 70% of that impossible is much greater than 100% of possible. So they may fail in their goal of like organizing world's information, but they will be really good at search, like as a first step. So it's not exactly failure, but it's a different way you are looking at failure. So it's not failure, like if you, I would say, like for moonshots. So.
So most of the stuff that you said about evaluating a startup, I felt as if it was more like the smaller startups. So I personally have an interview with a mid-size size startup like next week. They have like 300 people, and I'm not interviewing with the founders. I'm interviewing with one of their managers. So what sort of so about their financial stability and their positioning? Would those people actually know as much as their founders? Is it fair for me to expect them to answer those questions for me? If not, where can I find those answers?
You can ask them to their team also. There is very high likelihood, at least I don't know about like how's their interview process is. Most interview process, at least in Bay Area, I'm assuming the startup is in Bay Area. Most startups in Bay Area, one of the interviews will be one of the senior team members will be doing that. What we call, we have generally like series of interviews, like 3, 4, 5. It depends on like how they want to evaluate you. So one of the interviews is done by one of the senior team members, what I mean by senior team members is like executive level. The executive level titles are generally like any of the C-level titles or like vice president, that they are very, very common, or director level titles. And they know all these numbers, they know all these things because they are part of those meetings. You are setting up the strategy for next year, next quarter, they are always part of that. And founders generally discuss these things because like these are very, very critical and important. You want entire team to know where we are as a standing. And if they don't know about that, that is also an interesting, you can interpret in multiple ways, to be honest. If they are not sharing, you can ask them like, hey, can you give me these answers? If you talk with whoever knows those numbers, like maybe the CFO of the company knows that, like, or the founders may know that, like, I want to know these, like, answers to these questions, and I think they will get back to you on that. So yeah, do ask them.
Here's a follow-up question to that. What kind of questions should you ask if it's, is there a difference between full-time and internship in the questions you might ask about financials or what's important in that sense?
Yeah, I don't think so there should be difference between internship and full-time because most people on the employer side of the table, they are looking towards internship program as like a leeway to get someone full-time once they graduate. That's the expected understanding of startups. It's big, be it as a smaller company, a startup, or bigger company. That's how it works. And from the internship side also, like you have to be very careful choosing the company that you want to work for as an intern because you want to join them in the future. So, but it's kind of like the test for you, like whether that culture is right for you, whether that it's the right area, the market is interesting, the work is interesting. So it's also a test for you also. So it shouldn't matter whether it's a full-time or intern, in my honest opinion. So yeah.
We're dwindling down in numbers a little bit. It's getting a little late. So how about let's end the formal question and answer period. I'm going to ask one last question.
Yes.
And we'll end that. And you guys can just have some open discussion.
Yes.
And the one last question is, you said you had a lot of friends applying to startups and things. What is the one thing you wish you could tell them all? What is the one thing they're all doing wrong and they're all missing that these folks need to know?
One thing, I think most of the points that I've already covered, but I would say do your research about like what that startup does, what is their market, what area they are tackling, what are their products. Surprisingly, most people don't do that, and it's really good. We have so much information on internet, so many things that you can look at, learn about them. At least the companies that you are interviewing with, you need not do that at the level of applying, may not require, but maybe like you have interview in like next few days. So you can always look for like what is that market they are doing. It might, as I said, the examples I gave you, like productivity software, advertising, like what are the new things that are happening, what are the new interesting companies, who are the interesting competitors that are there. So spend a lot of time doing that. It's always helpful. personal knowledge also you'll be gaining that. The worst thing can happen is like you know about certain market a lot, which is a good, always a good thing. And so spend a lot of time understanding what is that market, what that company does, what is their competitive differentiation. I think a lot of people don't do that, so I would really stress on that point.
Excellent. With that, let's all thank Dhawal for coming, and we can continue some
Thank you.
Thank you.